Muhammad Shafia, Tuba Yahya, and their daughters lived a life that looked perfect to the outside world, but behind the walls of their Canadian home, fear was stronger than love. What began as strict control slowly turned into obsession, where honor mattered more than human life. By the time the truth surfaced, lives were already lost, and the country was left asking how a family could become its own deadliest enemy. The Shafia family appeared to have everything many people dreamed of after settling in Canada. Their home stood in a quiet neighborhood, well-maintained and impressive from the outside. Expensive cars in the driveway and well-dressed family members gave the impression of success, stability, and respect. To neighbors and relatives, they seemed disciplined and traditional, a family that valued structure and order. Nothing about their daily routine suggested danger or darkness. Inside the house, life followed strict rules. Every action was measured against expectations that allowed no mistakes. The children were raised to believe that reputation mattered more than emotions, and obedience mattered more than personal desire. Simple choices, like clothing or friendships, were closely monitored. Privacy did not exist, and independence was treated as a serious threat. Love was often replaced by fear, though it was carefully hidden behind the image of responsibility and care. The daughters, in particular, felt the weight of constant control. Their lives were planned without their consent, their futures decided long before they could understand them. While the world outside offered freedom and opportunity, their home felt like a closed space where rules tightened with every passing year. What appeared to be guidance slowly turned into confinement. To the outside world, the Shafia family represented success through hard work and tradition. But beneath that polished surface, tension quietly grew. The pressure to maintain honor created a dangerous environment, one where disobedience was unforgivable and punishment was justified in the name of family pride. Unseen by anyone else, the foundation of this perfect life was already beginning to crack. As the daughters grew older, the gap between their lives at home and the world outside became impossible to ignore. School exposed them to new ideas, new freedoms, and a sense of choice they had never been allowed to experience. They began to question rules that once felt unbreakable. Simple desires, like choosing their own friends or imagining a future shaped by their own decisions, slowly took root. These changes were quiet but powerful, and they did not go unnoticed. Inside the family, these shifts were seen as a threat rather than growth. Every sign of independence was interpreted as disrespect. Suspicion replaced trust, and constant monitoring became routine. The atmosphere inside the home grew heavier, filled with silent judgment and unspoken warnings. What the daughters viewed as personal growth was seen by others as a loss of control. Tension increased with each passing day. Expectations tightened instead of easing. Restrictions multiplied, and small mistakes were treated as serious offenses. Fear became a tool used to enforce obedience, slowly stripping away any sense of safety. The family no longer functioned as a unit built on care, but as one driven by authority and punishment. The emotional distance within the household widened. Love became conditional, measured by compliance rather than connection. The daughters felt increasingly trapped, torn between the life they dreamed of and the reality they were forced to accept. Unresolved conflict lingered in every corner of the home, creating an unstable environment where anger and control quietly grew stronger, setting the stage for something far more devastating. As tensions continued to rise, control alone was no longer seen as enough to preserve the family's image. The fear of public shame began to dominate every decision. Tradition was used as a shield to justify increasingly extreme thoughts, turning cultural values into rigid rules that allowed no compromise. What had once been enforced through surveillance and punishment now shifted toward something far more deliberate and dangerous. Private discussions took place away from the rest of the household. Decisions were made quietly, without emotion, as if the lives involved were problems to be solved rather than people to be protected. The idea of honor became distorted, reshaped into a reason to erase what was considered disobedience. There was no sudden explosion of anger, only a slow, calculated progression toward a tragic conclusion. Outwardly, the family continued their routine. Daily life appeared unchanged, carefully maintained to avoid suspicion. Normal activities acted as a cover, hiding the seriousness of what was unfolding beneath the surface. This calm appearance made the situation even more dangerous, as no one outside the family sensed the urgency or the threat. The daughters remained unaware of the full extent of the danger surrounding them. While they sensed growing hostility and isolation, they could not imagine the irreversible decision that had already been made. Trust, once broken, had been replaced by rigid determination. What made this moment especially chilling was how the plan was framed. It was not seen as cruelty, but as necessity, not as violence, but as duty. In that twisted logic, empathy disappeared completely. By the time the plan reached its final form, there was no room left for doubt, only a path leading toward a night that would permanently change everything. The night arrived quietly, with nothing to suggest the horror that would follow. The family moved as they always did, following a routine that looked ordinary and harmless. A late drive did not raise suspicion. The roads were calm, the air still, and the destination seemed unimportant. To anyone watching from a distance, it was just another family spending time together. As the vehicle traveled farther from familiar streets, the sense of normal life slowly faded. The location was isolated, chosen carefully to avoid attention. Darkness covered the surroundings, and silence filled the space where help could never reach. What happened next was swift and final, carried out with cold intention rather than chaos. There was no struggle that anyone would hear, no chance for escape, and no mercy. When the vehicle entered the water, the surface closed quickly, hiding all evidence beneath it. The canal returned to stillness, giving no sign that lives had just been taken. By morning, the scene looked like a tragic accident. A car submerged in water, a family lost, and a story that seemed believable at first glance. News spread quickly, framed as an unfortunate incident. Sympathy followed, and questions were minimal. Yet beneath that calm explanation, the truth waited. Small details had already begun to betray the lie. The damage did not match an accident. The timing felt wrong. What was meant to erase shame instead created a mystery. That night did not only end 4 lives. It marked the moment when a carefully hidden darkness surfaced, setting off a chain of events that would expose one of the most disturbing crimes the country had ever faced. The investigation began with what seemed like routine procedure, but doubts quickly emerged. Officers studying the scene noticed that the vehicle showed no signs of losing control before entering the water. There were no skid marks, no damage that suggested an accident on the road. The angle at which the car rested felt deliberate rather than random. These small inconsistencies pushed investigators to look deeper. As timelines were reconstructed, more questions appeared. Phone records revealed movements that did not align with the original explanation. The family's actions before and after the incident felt carefully planned. Surveillance footage from nearby locations showed the vehicle traveling routes that made no sense for a casual drive. Each new detail weakened the idea of a tragic mistake. Investigators began examining the family's background. Reports from schools, social services, and past complaints painted a troubling picture of control and fear inside the household. The daughter's struggles were no longer invisible. What once seemed like strict parenting now looked like long-term abuse disguised as discipline. Autopsy results further shifted the case. Evidence suggested the victims were alive when the car entered the water. This single fact changed everything. The case was no longer about how the car ended up in the canal, but why it was placed there intentionally. As evidence accumulated, the investigation took a darker turn. What was first treated as an accident was now clearly a crime. The motive began to surface slowly, revealing a pattern driven by obsession with reputation and authority. With each discovery, investigators moved closer to exposing a truth far more horrifying than anyone initially imagined. As pressure from investigators increased, the carefully built story began to fall apart. Statements given earlier no longer matched new evidence. Timelines shifted slightly with each retelling, creating gaps that could not be ignored. What once sounded convincing now felt rehearsed and empty. Every attempt to maintain control only exposed deeper inconsistencies. Digital records became impossible to escape. Phone data revealed movements that directly contradicted claims of innocence. GPS information showed deliberate travel patterns, not confusion or panic. Surveillance cameras captured moments that placed the family exactly where they insisted they had never been. Each piece of technology quietly stripped away another layer of lies. Behavior after the incident also raised concern. Instead of shock and confusion, actions appeared calculated. There was a noticeable focus on image rather than loss. Investigators recognized this as an effort to protect reputation instead of seeking truth. Grief felt staged, measured, and incomplete. As the case moved forward, the motive became clearer. Control, fear, and obsession with honor had shaped every decision. What had been justified internally as discipline was now exposed as cruelty. The idea of tradition collapsed under the weight of evidence, revealing it had been used as a cover for violence. Public attention grew as details emerged. Sympathy quickly turned into outrage. The narrative shifted from tragedy to betrayal. By this stage, denial no longer mattered. The evidence spoke louder than words ever could. The lies did not collapse all at once, but piece by piece. And with each one exposed, the truth became undeniable, sealing the fate of those responsible and bringing the case closer to justice. As the case entered the public eye, the reaction across the country was immediate and intense. News coverage spread rapidly, and the details shocked people from every background. Many struggled to understand how such extreme violence could happen within a family living in a peaceful community. What disturbed the public most was not only the crime itself, but the motive behind it. The idea that lives could be taken to protect a sense of honor forced the nation to confront a harsh reality. Discussions erupted across media platforms, schools, and government spaces. Experts spoke about the dangers of unchecked control and the misuse of cultural beliefs to justify abuse. Communities that had remained silent for years were suddenly pushed into the spotlight. Survivors of similar environments began sharing their experiences, revealing that this case was not an isolated incident, but an extreme example of a wider problem. The victims were no longer seen as just names in a case file. They became symbols of lost freedom and unheard voices. Candlelight vigils were held, and messages of support filled public spaces. There was deep sorrow mixed with anger, especially over the warning signs that had been ignored. The justice system also faced scrutiny. Questions were raised about how institutions respond to hidden abuse and whether enough is done to protect those at risk. Laws, policies, and social services were re-examined under public pressure. This case changed national conversations forever. It made clear that violence cannot be excused by tradition, belief, or control. The shock it caused reshaped awareness, leaving a lasting impact on how the country views family, freedom, and responsibility. The trial brought every hidden detail into the open, laying out the full weight of what had been done. Evidence was presented carefully, showing planning, intent, and a complete lack of remorse for the lives that were lost. The court examined years of control, fear, and abuse that led to the final act. What had once been hidden behind family privacy was now exposed under the harsh light of justice. When the verdict was delivered, it marked a rare moment of accountability in a case built on silence. The ruling sent a clear message that no belief, tradition, or claim of honor could ever justify violence. The law stood firmly with the victims, recognizing them not as symbols, but as individuals whose lives had value and meaning. While punishment could not undo the harm, it confirmed that their suffering had not been ignored. The aftermath of the case left a heavy legacy. Families across the country were forced to reflect on the difference between culture and cruelty. Authorities strengthened awareness programs, schools improved reporting systems, and social services became more alert to warning signs that had once been overlooked. The case became a reference point in discussions about protection and prevention. Despite these changes, the loss remained permanent. For lives were gone, futures erased before they could begin. The story continues to serve as a reminder of the dangers of absolute control and enforced silence. Justice may have closed the case, but its impact still echoes, warning that when fear replaces compassion, tragedy is never far behind.